And so I guess I'll just I'll bring your screen up and I'll turn it over to you, Rory.
Thanks so much. This is my second time speaking at .NET Conf, and it's an incredible opportunity for me to show. This is the second time I've actually spoken on this topic, and there's been a lot of new changes in the year that I've actually spoken. So if you don't know who I am, my name is Rory Preddy, and I have brown hair, I'm wearing a gray shirt, and I'm sitting here in my home office in Johannesburg, South Africa, and I'm a cloud advocate for Microsoft. And cloud advocates use their deep research skills and their abilities to reach developers where they are. And one of the tools that we recently announced and we want developers to use is the Azure Developer CLI. And that paired with DevContainers has made my life very interesting and very easy. So I wanted to actually do this presentation for you. So you can follow me on @RoryPeddy on the tweeters, and let's get started. So originally last year when I told you about this talk, I did it in Code Spaces, and I told you about how I learned how to, in the pandemic, how to code in the bath. And I've got my trusty Samsung phone here that I'm just reaching for. And I actually learned that with Code Spaces, you could actually use a full development environment and spin it up and get a lot done. So this is the demo that I did previously. And you can see there, that's the actual Code Space. So this is my Samsung phone. You can even see there that I've taken a screenshot of my Samsung phone. And don't worry, since then, I haven't actually dropped it in the bath then. It is IPX, I think 6 or 8 waterproof though, but I haven't managed to damage it. The problem is we're seeing a lot of people having real pain today. Now, the pandemic may have changed certain development habits, but it also created some pain that people are experiencing. So I wanted to do this talk because I found these tool sets and they kind of alleviated a lot of the pain of my day-to-day. So first of all, we have large repos. So we're starting to see Git repos and mono repos, and it takes hours to actually begin work on your mono repo. And it's manually and repetitive. We also have long inner loops. At Microsoft, we call it an inner loop, the ability to code, debug, deploy locally, and then rinse and repeat. And that's called an inner loop. And long inner loops, due to underpowered hardware or hardware that is really not configured correctly, you may have lots of tools running on your laptop or desktop. And as a result, you have slow serial builds. And then with remote work, most devs are hybrid, experiencing latency. Now I'm in Johannesburg, South Africa. Every time I want to do anything, I get like a 400 millisecond ping, and I experience a lot of latency. So for me, when I actually code closer to the servers that I need to, I get a lot of increased performance. So what is our North Star? So the North Star is what we're heading towards for dev productivity. So first of all, we want a rich local environment. We want to personalize local environments, and we want ideally to spin them up and to tear them down for short-lived task environments. We also want shared resources and artifacts, and then we want to take those shared resources and artifacts. If we want to do anything intensive with them, we want to take the CPU intensive work and we want to run it in the cloud. So we want the ability to run it locally for our short-lived task environments, and more intensive work, run it in a cloud or on another runner. We also want remote work friendly. So low latency workloads managed in the cloud or managed in a container as close to that cloud as possible. So today I'm going to talk to you about dev containers. I'm going to define what a dev container is. Then I'm going to discuss the Azure Developer CLI, or AZD for short. And then I'm going to also give you a demo. And then I'm going to give you an awesome link where you can get started with a few clicks. So what is dev containers or development containers? So you can go to containers.dev, and it's an open specification that allows you to actually see that what we've done is we've taken the idea between a container, and we've made it, and we've paired it with the idiomatic development mindset of, wait a second, a developer needs certain types of services and processes aligned to this container to actually get their environment up. So you can go to containers.dev. There are some supporting tools, and then we're going to go through features now, templates and collections, and this is the specification. What the dev container allows you to do, you've got your inner loop needs, and then you've also got your outer loop. You want to put it into CI or production. You've got your OS runtimes and shared libraries, which are shared in your inner loop and your outer loop. So your inner loop, I develop on a dev container, and my outer loop uses that same dev container to do that testing. Then you've got your compilers, SDKs, libraries, and build tools that are shared among them. But inside my inner loop, I have debuggers, OS utilities and CLIs, and personalization and product tools inside my inner loop. And then the source code is shared between the two. And once I push to production, then I can actually create my production container. My deployment app needs certain features, and then I've got my compiled application. And this is your typical edit loop. So you've got your add your development container files to your existing project. You edit a file called .devcontainer in the folder contents. You reopen in container, and we'll do that in the demo. If it's success, done, yay. If it's an error, then you can actually open the folder locally again, modify the dev container, review the logs that are creating the container, rinse and repeat, and get that container perfectly tuned to exactly what you want in a development environment. So let's go get started on how you can actually add those developer containers. So it's easy to actually add them. You just can create a template. You can go add dev container configuration file. You do need the remote extension. So the remote container extension in Visual Studio Code. And you can go, then once you have that, you can just go add development container files. And look at that, I've added .NET, and you can see there all of those projects there will add a devcontainer.json and a Docker file into my project and get me ready to start that project into an isolated Docker instance or run it on code spaces. I can also add features. This is a very new feature. This is a very new features. Features are a new feature. Now, last year when I spoke about this, features didn't exist, and I showed you how to actually install certain tooling. Now, what features actually does, it allows you to install that tooling much easier. So instead of you running bash scripts left and right, you can actually just say, hey, I just want this feature. You can see here in this example, I've got the .NET CLI, and it installs the .NET CLI and has all of the scripting, maybe 300-400 lines of scripting to actually get it done. So you can add the features there, and as a result, you don't have to script it in your devcontainer.json. So this is what the devcontainer.json looks like. Now, we've seen how you can add the container features and also the features. So you can get an image, and the image is going to point to a Docker file. We're going to come back to that Docker file a little bit after this, though. And then you got a variant, so a parameter there that you can pass through. In this example, we have bullseye. So you know it's Debian, because Debian uses bullseye as a keyword for their production version. Then you've got the features. In this feature, I've just got one feature. That's the Azure CLI. I've got the version there. And then it's going to install the Azure CLI. I might have the .NET CLI or any other CLI there. Then I've got extensions. Now, extensions are Visual Studio Code extensions. So over here, I want to connect to Azure. So I've got the Azure Dev extension, and it's going to install it into my Visual Studio Code instance. I'm going to port forward. I am running on a Docker instance, a container. So I might want to use certain ports. And in our demo, we're going to actually go do some testing on port 3100. And then afterwards, I've got some post config there. The user I'm going to run on Docker is VS Code. And then the host requirements, very important. I'm going to run with 8 gigs of RAM because, you know, some of the applications, they do have a thirst requirement for memory. In my Docker file, it's much simpler than a lot of Docker files with dev containers because we're using features. The only thing that I really need to install here, you can see there, is the Azure Developer CLI, which doesn't have a feature just yet, though. So I've got my variant here, bullseye, and then I've got the bullseye that is passed into the variant parameters, and that is a Debian instance there that Microsoft maintains and supports. So this is great, but I don't want to write things by hand. Now, there is another way that you can actually do that. You can use the dev container editor that is on the GitHub editor. So in this example here, I've got the Azure samples, the repo that I'm going to show you, and I just clicked on that little 3 buttons there, and it says configure dev container. And I can also create a code space, which I'm going to give a little bit of a demo later on. And in there now you can get a editor, and you can see there I've got a marketplace. There's the Azure CLI. It will go in and create those features for you, so you don't have to worry about editing that dev container .json by hand if you don't want to. So now that we've looked at dev containers and also the very powerful presence of it for a developer, let's look at the Azure Developer CLI. Now, I've got an idea. I'm going to think of an app and its components, and I want to build it to do web app, and I need a front end, I need a back end, and a database. I'm not too sure about the technology. I haven't decided that. I just know I need a database, back end API, and then a front end with a user interface. Now, I want to use React to create the UI, C# for the backend, and SQL for my database. And I'm going to use VS Code as the editor. So you can see the SQL database. Now the API is going to connect to that database, and then React and UI. Now, for my local environment, I can just choose a tech stack and my editor, and I should be able to create that dev container and use the Azure Developer CLI to build the skeleton, the prototype of my application for me to get started. But how do I deploy it in the cloud? Don't I need to know all of the glue to actually deploy it? And normally you do. Now that's really what the Azure Dev CLI wants to obfuscate around it here, because to get your code into the cloud, you have to kind of understand all of these things. Which cloud service do I use? What libraries? How should I set up my environment? Provision your infrastructure, similar to how some infrastructure service tools like Terraform does it, except we use another service called Bicep, which I'm going to show you. It's a new technology that Microsoft has released that allows you to actually convert your script directly into ARM, Azure Resource Manager script. And it's a great way and a quick way to actually use infrastructure as a code. Now, my developer Go app running in the cloud with CI/CD and monitor, how do I get that done? There's so many different things. So I know that I've got my React app. I've got my API service. I'm going to connect to my SQL database. I want to use a Key Vault for my secrets because we at Microsoft believe in zero trust. We want to make sure that our secrets are safe. And then monitoring for Azure Monitor. There's so many different services here. This is what the Bicep actual template looks like. Look at that. Can you imagine typing that by hand? It will take you a very long time. There's so many different nuances of that, though. But the Azure Developer CLI has made it pretty simple. All you have to do is you have to go AZD app-template, and the example we're going to use is to do C# SQL, and it's going to install all of that. It's going to wire to your Key Vault. It's also going to create a dev container for you that we're going to test now, and it's going to start up your development environment. If you wanted to also add GitHub Actions with CI/CD, you can just go AZD pipeline config, and then you'd go AZD monitor for Azure Monitor. This is an example. So before we go into the live demo, it does take a few minutes if I weren't to speed it up. So this is sped up just a little bit. So in here, I've got AZD app-t, so the template, and then to do C# SQL. And you can access that on Azure samples. This is an Azure sample. It's going to pull down the Git repo, and then it's going to actually run. You can see there, I've called it .NET Conf. It's going to create the resource group for me. And I can view at any given time in the Azure portal the actual status here. It's created my app service plan. It's created my Key Vault, and it's also wired together, and it's going to wire my database. So it's got my log analytics workspace. It's also created my Azure Monitor, or commonly called Application Insights. It's got my dashboard that it's created for me, my portal, and now it's creating my web app. Remember, the web app is React, so it's going to have a React app, and then it's going to actually point to my C# app for my API. There it is. It created my web app, and now it's going to build the application. So it uses MS Build here. It's going to deploy my application. It deployed the service application, and then it's going to deploy the web application. You can see there, now I've got the entire application scaffolded out for me, and then it gives me the URL, and then rinse and repeat. So now demo time. And I like this, this metaphor of me coding in the bath here. So let's go look at the demo. So the first thing is I've opened that exact project. So this is the, you can see the .NET Conf project, and I created it yesterday just to make sure that everything's runs. And here's my DevContainer.json, and it's exactly what we saw here. There are a few more features because I need the Azure CLI, I need Docker, I need .NET, I need the GitHub CLI because if I wanted to create a GitHub pipeline, and then I need Node. And I've got all of my extensions that I've got here. So I've got Bicep, Docker, I've got C#, and then also the .NET runtime. I'm opening up my ports, and then I've got my memory requirements. But this is running in Visual Studio Code based on my laptop. And you can see that it's running on Visual Studio Code because I've got the remote extension here, open a remote window right at the bottom on the left-hand side here. So I can click on here because I want to open this as I would in a code space or a dev container instance here. So I can click on here, and now I can see reopen in container. Now, reopen in container is going to take the Docker file and the dev container, and check this out. Now, I have opened it up a little bit before because this is a short 30-minute session. So I'm going to reopen the container. It's going to find the Docker file for me. And if it hasn't built it, it's going to build it for me. So it's going to go reopen the container. And there it is. So it's already found it. It knows that it's already built. It didn't have to do anything else. And it's now opening a container. And how do I know it's running a container? Look at that. It actually says there, Dev Container, Azure Developer CLI. That's the only reason and the only way that you actually know that this is currently running in a container. I can click on here, and I can see here, I can reopen the folder locally. I can go back to just opening it locally, and then I can make changes to the dev container and then go back in and recreate my dev container. I can rebuild the container, so it's going to rebuild the Docker instance and the dev container. I can also open the container configuration files, show container log. Check this out. I can show the container log, and now I can see the entire Docker instance that was built in. You can see there it's running all of those layers. It's port forwarding. It's quite a lot of changes that it did there. And then I can also open a folder in the container. I can create a dev container. I can clone another repository in a container volume, or I can even attach to a running container. So it's very much similar to a lot of the kind of the Docker mindset that developers are used to if you're running in a development environment. So this is the project that we've got here, and this is the scaffolding that Microsoft has created as part of the Azure Dev CLI. I've got a program.cs, and that will call a list controller, and it will create a list repository pointing to a SQL, a Microsoft SQL database. So, Rory, what are you actually going to do with this demo? What I'm going to do with this demo, I'm going to show you how to develop locally with a dev container. Because remember, when I wake up in the morning and I kind of have my cell phone and I code in the bath, I want to create an instance because I do demos. I do about 3 or 4 demos every week. And I want to make sure my instance is running and I can actually do that demos. So let's go through the program.cs here. You can see there, I've got my web application. I add a key vault, Azure Key Vault, because I have zero trust. I want my passwords floating around in the ether here. And this is going to give me the ability to connect to my Microsoft SQL database. You can see there, it's an add Azure Key Vault, and that comes from Azure, Azure Identity. And in here, I've got a URI, and I get the Key Vault endpoint, and then I've got the default Azure credentials. And I build it, then the connection string to use my SQL Server. I add the controllers. I add the application insights for the telemetry. And then I create the get required services, and get the created sync, add some cores, and then add Swagger, very important, add Swagger, add some static files, add the map controllers, and then run. So this is pretty simple to use though, but over here it says Key Vault. Where am I actually even getting that Key Vault? Now where I'm getting that Key Vault is the same environment file that was created when we actually created that scaffolding with that to-do application. It created a environment file called a .env file. I'm not going to open it right now because it's got all my secrets there, but that .env file is actually now being used to run my tasks. So if I go into my VS Code tasks launch.json, you can see that when I debug, it's actually going to use a .env file. So it knows exactly what to do. It knows where my my key vault file is. I don't have to even use passwords or anything. So I should be able to just go in here and run in debug. It'll connect to my key vault. My key vault will download my files. And remember, I'm running this in a container. It could be code spaces, could be anywhere. And then it will connect to my database. And now I can debug locally into my container, into my database that I've just created for my prototype on my SQL Server. So let's go look here. So now I want to debug, and over here, I can debug my API. I can also debug my web, but this is a container, so I don't have any browsers actually locally running here, but I could actually do that if I created a front-end development container. So I want to do debug API here. I have logged into Azure in my container. It logs in automatically. Now I'm going to debug here, and I've created a little breakpoint on my list controller. This is a to-do application, so it creates to-dos. And on my list controller here, I've got a little to-do here. So let's go in here, and then we're going to actually see what this application looks like with the front end also. So now I've actually running my application, and you can see there it's running through the loading of the restoring of the dependencies, and now it's going to try to connect to my database through the Key Vault. It's going to download that Key Vault URI and then connect to my SQL Server. And then it should actually say to me, Rory, I have a port that I want to open. Remember in the port there, 3100. There we go. Your application is running on port 3100. Do you want to open it? Now it uses port forwarding. So when I open it, it's going to port forward to my local host, or if you're on code spaces, it's going to actually port forward it to a random URL. So I'm going to open my browser here, and here's my, let's go into here, and let's go into, let's go find the, there we go. Here's my Swagger URI. And you can see there, I've got a list of lists, a list of lists. And in my list here, I've got my Swagger, and I can try it out here. I've only created one list here, and I can execute. And there we go. Now we're debugging. We're debugging in a container on my local PC, running all of these dependencies. You can see there, I've got all of these dependencies. There's my thread pool here. I can add a watch variable here. So let me add a watch variable here of to-do list here. I can just go add and to-do list there, and it'll show me all of those errors that it doesn't actually like. It's just because I actually had to do our numeral with an action result. I'm not going to do that right now. And yeah, so and you've got those inline variables here, and I can step over or step into. I'm going to step return here, and if I go back into there's my list there, and there's my actual list that I have here. So that's great. Now I've got my environment here. So what I want to do next here is I actually want to go deploy this application into a production environment. I'm running it locally. So I really want to run this in somewhere like on a container app. Rory, container apps? You didn't tell me we're going to do container apps. I'm going to do container apps here. Remember, this is a Docker instance. Now I'm going to run this on container apps or app services here. And I can actually just run that locally, and I can just go AZD deploy. So if I go into here and let's go into a terminal here. I want to stop that there, and I want to go into terminal. I can just go into my bash script here, and I can go AZD deploy, but I have actually deployed it before to save time. I can just go AZD monitor. It's going to find my application that I did deploy, and it's going to open up my application on, there we go, Azure Monitor. And then it's going to tell me, Rory, let's go back into here. And this is the nicety of running StreamYard, because it actually opens multiple windows. Let's go into here. And I never closed that StreamYard window. I did that actually once. That's a bad idea. So let's maximize that. So now it's going to open my application, and I deployed this recently here. And you can see this is the application. I've got my application map, and now I get all of those niceties over here. And now understand, all I did was just do AZ up, and now I've got my application, and I can go into my application there. Let's go into the application. You can see there, and I've got my entire map of my application into my SQL database, and I can go through here. So let's go into our app services. And I did lie. This is actually running on app services, not a container app. The other template, and I'm going to give you a link for that, actually runs on container app. Very similar template for here. So this is created app services here. And then I can click on here. So let's see if it did deploy my application end to end. There's my AZD to do. And you can also do one with the container app here. And now it's going to load my list out. And now this is running with React. It deployed all of that. I can add my item here, and then I can go watch or .NET Conf on demand. Let's see if it can actually take that entire on demand videos. Now it should actually add it there onto the list here. I think that might have been, yeah, there we go. Watch all demand, and I can edit that and do that. So in a matter of minutes, I've actually gone in, I've created a dev container. Now, what happens if I want to run this on code spaces locally here? Not locally. I can actually do that. So let's go into code spaces here. And now this is my Rory Pretty Enterprise account on GitHub. I've got to do C# here, and that's forked off the same application as sample that I did there. And I've actually got it running on code spaces here. And you can see right at the bottom on the left hand, the only reason you know it's code spaces, not Visual Studio Code, it actually says code spaces. And now I can actually go in, and I can even attach to the container that I'm running on my local PC. Or I can actually go in and debug my application. I can go there. Now, this always shocks people. Now I'm going to debug my application in the browser. So I can debug my application. Remember, this is the same dev container that I just ran, and was created by the Azure Developer CLI. I'm debugging the API. It's going to connect to my database. Now this is a lot of oomph. This PC, this instance here, it's 16 CPU. I can even up it to 32 CPU, even 64 CPU, and 128 gigs of RAM. So now it's opening up there. Now I can open up in my browser. It's port forwarding there, and I've got my list here. And you can see how easy and quick that was to actually get started. So we're almost out of time. I want to show you what we need to do. So all of this that I've given you, including the container option, you can see there's the Azure app service, and you can do container apps. You can just click on .NET. They've just relaunched the Java options also there. Azure app services here, Azure container apps. You can just go to azure.github.io awesome.azd. And that's everything that I wanted to show you today. I'm going to bring up that window again for StreamYard and pop it into another window, and we can take some questions.
Wow, that was awesome. You covered a lot. And that was fun. I followed along and got things set up on my, I've got a newish laptop, and so I followed along and got things set up there. So I didn't see any questions. What are some things that people like? What are some next steps? You've got the awesome AZD set up on there. Is there any other kind of cool things that are fun to play with?
I definitely think GitHub code spaces. So if I go into, let's go into that view here. So if I show you GitHub code spaces here, and now they've just announced yesterday, GitHub Code Spaces now has free, 60 hours free. You can go in and you can sign up here. But if I go into Code Spaces here, I can go code, and then I can go Code Space. I click on here, and I can go configure dev container. I can configure my dev container, and now I can actually go in and I can go look through all those features. So I can see all those features that you get here. Let's see if we can find anything with ML. I loved Hank's talk there. There's the .NET CLI, and I can add that there. I can add the .NET CLI, and you can see there it's already added. and I can add there, and it'll tell me exactly how to add it there. And look at that. It even shows me how to do that with the options of how to do that. And this is a great opportunity for you to actually get started with DevContainers. And then once I'm finished with that, I can go into my container here. And now that it's open to everyone for public, I can just go in and I can go new with options. Check this out. I've got 4 core, but look at these options here. I've got 32 core, 64.
Oh my gosh.
No, you don't understand the power that I have there. And it's the same that I run in my PC, but in Johannesburg, South Africa, the latency is terrible. Now I run this here, I wait for a conference or talk and everything like that. I spin it up in the bath with my Azure Dev CLI, with the Dev container, in code spaces or locally here. And it's just, it's a game changer. It really is, because it's allowed me to just treat my my environments as, instead of pets, like naming my laptop everything as cattle. I'm just going to tear this down after this talk and then get on with my day.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. Well, this is really cool, and definitely something, I mean, we've got 80 plus talks this week, things back to back, but this is one I'm definitely going to look more at afterwards. So thank you so much for your time, Rory. This was great.
Thank you for everything, for hosting me.